And so I'm thinking about all kinds of texts. That's why I called this presentation Popular Cultural Texts. And texts can be both written, like books, of course, but also visual, right? And also multimodal, so the oral as well as the oral, right? Things you can see and things you can hear at the same time. So things like popular literature, newspapers, movies, TV programs, music, books, and then in the corner I have social media, because that's also a form of popular culture that circulates, right? And so through these media we often share some of information about the other forms, and there's like growing interpenetration, I think, of the different forms of popular culture these days. Okay, supplementing language textbooks. How many of you work with a textbook in the classes that you teach? I was really surprised to learn that with the teachers at the secondary level and at the primary level, they don't necessarily have a common textbook for the curriculum. I had no idea. So this has been part of my culture learning during my visit here. And so a lot of them talked about using different sources to present language material. I think that's really special. It provides a unique opportunity. It's also a lot more work, as we all know, right? Having to find things that then will be appropriate, not just appropriate, but right at the right level, and that are going to teach, our objectives and all of that. So something that when we're in a situation where we're constrained by a given textbook, again, I'm probably telling you something you already know, the emphasis has traditionally been on structures and vocabulary. And textbooks are really, really good at providing that kind of information in a compendium. Part of the problem with textbooks, though, as a teacher told me just yesterday, is that, I have these dialogues in the textbook, but they're absurd. I can tell that by reading them that nobody talks like this. So I just skip over those. I don't even use them when I teach my classes because it's not going to be helpful, right? So there's some variation, and I hear this with my own students in North America, for example, who have studied Spanish in high school for 4 years and then taken 2 years of Spanish in college, and they go and they do their immersion experience in Mexico or in Costa Rica, and they get there and they say, I have no idea what people are saying. I got A's on all my tests. How can this be? Why do we have this discrepancy? Well, the textbook language was very different from the language that they encountered on the street or in their host families, right? So again, this is a phenomenon that we're all familiar with, and it's, typical limitation of textbooks. My colleague Heidi Vellinga has identified, also carried out a study comparing speech acts, so the social functions of language, inviting, thanking, greeting, disagreeing, threatening, warning, all of those wonderful things. She compared speech acts in a series of textbooks, and she found that the representation is really minimal. So the textbooks tend to focus on grammar, for example, and they'll say, okay, and again, I'm sure you all have experienced this, modal verbs. Would is more polite than will. What does that mean, right? And like, when do you use it? And who do you use it with? And in what context do you use it? And when do you not use it? So textbooks sort of can't be that comprehensive and provide all of the answers. They give us a little bit of information, but there's a lot that is not covered in textbooks, unfortunately. Another article that I really like is by Washburn, and this is an article that I just had my students back home read a couple of weeks ago. Washburn talks about how we can use situation comedies to teach some of these things, to teach pragmatics. And she says situation comedies are wonderful because they're not only engaging, right? They're funny, or they're humorous, or they're at least mildly entertaining at worst. They're also multimodal. So you get to hear speakers, you get to see the physical environment that they're in. Unlike the textbook, which is flat and two-dimensional, you have people engaged in motion, moving around. You can see their facial expressions, you can hear their intonation change. All of these kinds of things provide a rich context for teaching pragmatics, teaching this kind of culturally loaded language. And so this particular article, it's beautiful. It's in Tessel Journal. It's about 5 pages long. It's probably the favorite thing that my students read all semester long. I'm happy to share it if anyone wants to read it. I have it in PDF form. She gives several examples, the author does, of how she uses Seinfeld, for example, to teach different aspects of pragmatics to her students who are immigrants in the U.S. in different levels. So sort of middle-aged students versus the younger 18 to 20-year-olds, right? So sort of some of the variety that we encounter in our classes.